Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, COVID-19 Conversations, Managing Pandemic Fatigue in the Workplace. My name is Gabby Lemon, and I'm the event specialist here at Workplace Safety North. We appreciate your attendance here today and want to let you know COVID-19 Conversations is an ongoing webinar series that features a monthly webinar from May to October on issues related to the current global pandemic. Before we get started, we'd like to mention a few housekeeping items. During the webinar, you may see the screen freeze up or hear static on the microphone. This is usually temporary and due to internet connection issues. We appreciate your patience and understanding with the technology. Your microphones have been muted, and we ask that you use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen for speaker questions. If you have any technical issues using the Zoom application, do let us know in the chat box and we'll do our best to help you. So to clarify, please put any commentary or technical questions in the chat box and speaker questions in the Q&A section. Resource information and a recording of the webinar will be sent to you within 1 business day. Now I'd like to pass things over to host Angel Poitras, Community Engagement Specialist and Certified Psychological Health and Safety Advisor here at Workplace Safety North. Welcome, Angel.
Thank you very much, Gabby. Welcome to everybody. This is our 5th COVID conversation, so thank you for joining us. Many of us are suffering COVID fatigue, and that's been demonstrated by the almost 266 of you that are joining us today. So do some of these things sound familiar to you? What's the big deal? There have only been a few cases here in the North. Hey, I just worked through the entire pandemic, or I'm so stressed out with COVID, I just want my world back. So how do we as employers ensure that we're taking the necessary precautions and staying ahead of what we could be feeling and terming pandemic fatigue? When you Google COVID fatigue or pandemic fatigue, you end up with 199 million hits. Wow. So it looks like we're not alone. This fatigue can take many forms, but we know it has increased our stress, and we know that prolonged stress isn't good for any of us. So those of you who've been joining us for our COVID conversations know that we group our conversation into 3 main themes. Today, those themes will be mental health, strategies, and our workplaces. And as we often do, we have a poll question for you today. It is around the pandemic fatigue, and we want to know, where do you find most of your stress coming from? Is it home and family life? Is it work life, other, or all of the above? So while you're taking some time to complete the poll, I'll tell you a little bit about Workplace Safety North. We are the provider of health and safety services in Northern Ontario and beyond now. We have collectively 100 years of experience, and we're very, very committed to our clients. We work with our other system partners in the health and safety system of Ontario, and our COVID conversations was a way to extend our former Feed Your Brain series. Every situation that we've come into with our clients, we've tried to translate those messages into our Feed Your Brain and our COVID conversations. Gabby, has anybody started answering our polls yet? Oh, yes, here we go. So 15% of you are citing that it's home and family life that is bringing COVID fatigue into your life. Work life is at 38% and other is at 5%. And 43% of us say all of the above is contributing to our COVID fatigue. So thank you very much. That gives us a really good idea of where we are all kind of at as we start this conversation. So today our speaker is going to be Irene Caufield-Cook. I've known Irene for about 25 years, and we first met through her volunteer work with elder abuse. It seems like a lifetime ago, but it really hasn't been that long. So she is a partner in Caufield Counselling and Consulting, a Sudbury-based company providing counseling, consulting, and training locally, provincially, and nationally for over 30 years. She's provided services ranging from individual counseling to development, implementation, and coordination of crisis-based programs for workplaces. It is this experience that has resulted in her providing her services for numerous agencies and companies. Irene has her M.S.W, her B.S.W, B.A, as well as specialized training in areas such as therapeutic family meditation. She is trained in several risk assessment styles, assisting families in times of conflict and crises. Upon request, completes parenting assessments for the courts. She has provided training in various areas, including trauma and its impact on victims and their family. So welcome, Irene.
Thank you.
Glad to have you with us today. And I'm very, very grateful that you made time to join us because I know you're extremely busy.
This is
So
a
Irene,
very important issue.
well, thank you for thinking so. Irene, when COVID began, can you share with us, did your practice have any changes? Did you see more people accessing your services?
I think our practice changed substantially because we had a lot of obviously things that we had to factor in, and we had to make a lot of changes within the office and trying to figure out where things were going, public health, safety. But one of the biggest things I think we learned is that as much as there's technology to support with provision of all the services that we do, it's not something that could be safely done for a lot of our clients. It was not safe for people to try and have the discussions that they would be having in our office over public, like over whether it be Zoom, over their phone. The challenge is we have a lot of families that are all home together. And sometimes people are coming to counseling in an effort to deal with things that would place them in danger. It's hard to have important conversations when there's other ears listening to what you're talking about. And the moment you try and find a quiet spot to talk, everybody needs to know what that important discussion is. So it's almost impossible for people to find a quiet place.
Thanks for sharing that, Irene. That was one of my aha moments in our first conversation about, being at home. And 43% of us say home and work and life, they're all contributing to our COVID fatigue. So Irene, I say to you COVID fatigue, and you say what? What's the first thing pops into your mind?
Weary. I think everybody's getting weary. I think people are feeling done, and I think people are demonstrating that in many different ways. And I think sadly, as this goes longer, people are coping and functioning less well with it. So as we learn the rules, then the rules get adjusted. And so people are really struggling with what the expectations are.
So you've seen that in your own practice, the struggles that people are having. Would you term them COVID fatigue in some instances?
Well, I think in the absence of COVID, we wouldn't be seeing this level of struggles. I mean, we have seen so many changes in people's lives, in their families' lives, in the workplaces. We are seeing changes in people's character and workplace culture. So it's definitely a challenging time. And I think COVID is directly related to it because nothing in our lives has impacted us to the same level that it is at this point.
Now, Irene, would you agree it's okay to feel not okay at this time? Like be a little bit extra kind to ourselves, maybe the people around us?
I'm actually worried when people are totally okay with what's going on, because I think there's just been so many changes. There's been so many demands put upon people. There's been no real respite from it. It's ongoing, and we see it in every part of our life. Going to get milk and bread now requires understanding of the protocol for that. So before, you would wander into the grocery store, think about what you needed, wander the aisles, pick up a little bit extra. Now we've got arrows. We've got people who are pointing out the arrows. We have people who are helping the people pointing out the arrows. We have conflict. There's a lot of things going on, and that's just going to the grocery store.
Right.
Kids
I had never
going
even
to
thought
school.
of that. That's why I'm just kind of chuckling, because it's very onerous to do things that we took for granted. And, you're segueing in right into the very first part of our conversation when we're talking about mental health. And, I mean, we all know that stress is bad, like really bad if it continues, right? And if we're continually exposed to it and it's immediate and ongoing stress, what kind of impact is that going to have on as people? What kind of impact will that have on our family? What kind of impact will that have on our workplaces, this continued stress?
When you think about it, our stress is designed to get us through immediate physical danger. And this is not that. So there is an element of danger, but it's ongoing. And so the adrenaline and the assorted other ways that our body reacts sets us up to do fight or flight. That's a problem because you can't get up in the middle of a Zoom meeting and race out of the office. It's not helping people sit still and work on that. We really have to look at how do we start to recognize and have a bit of compassion for ourselves and others in understanding that the tools that we're hardwired with are not designed for what we're going through at this point?
Right. So Irene, if we don't really take a strong and hard look at stress, what do you think are going to be some of these long-term effects that we're going to be feeling as organizations, as people, in this constant state of the fight syndrome rather than flying
Yeah,
away?
I think people are much more reactive. I think everybody's
Oh,
fuse is a little bit shorter. I think whether it be in their family life, in their home life, in the drive to or from work, people are reacting to each other. And when we're reacting, that's not us at our best. And so I think that's creating sort of them and us situations in
yeah.
workplaces, in families. It's not setting us up to be the teams that we need to be to coexist and to work as a team.
There's been research that's indicating that prolonged stress can
Mhm.
lead to certain types of cancers, high blood pressure, diabetes. Are those the things that we're going to start seeing if people aren't able to combat their own stress?
I think we have to be careful because stress causes, really nothing directly, but makes everything worse. So if a person's struggling with their blood pressure, well, that's being elevated, and we know the ripples in health of high blood pressure.
Right.
So did COVID cause some of the disease a little later on? Maybe not directly, but we can certainly point out to that COVID added to that.
Okay,
I
and a
think,
little bit later in the conversation, we're going to talk about actual solutions. So we'll
yeah,
we'll save that part of the conversation for a little bit later on. But I know, Irene, you've also in your volunteer work have followed some natural disasters and provided some crisis management. Can you explain a little bit about how that situation has similar things to COVID, but also some very different areas?
yeah, I think it's actually quite fascinating because we would think disaster. Something bad has happened. It's this large, then we must be going through a similar process. If we look at the ice storms,
Mhm.
that was a situation where it was time limited. It was horrible, but when it happened, the helpers were running towards that area. The community members were helping. When they saw it wasn't their house, they wanted to help their neighbors. They were showing up at some of the warming stations that were set up. Everybody was working together to help. We went through something similar, and we just went through the 50th anniversary of the tornado that hit Sudbury. Once again, people were running towards their neighbors. They were running towards who they could help. They were bringing things. It was very active.
Right.
There was a lot you could do. You could feel very helpful. With this, it's much more divisive. I think people are much more weary. There's a lot less trust. People are questioning what each other's doing. That person's not doing this person's not doing that right. I mean, if you stand in the grocery store, you can watch what's happening there. I've had people where they feel their neighbors are watching them to see who's coming and going from their home. We are pulling apart instead of coming together. And part of it is because this has been months and months and months, and it's not measurable. We don't have something that we can run towards. We don't know how this is going to end.
It was really interesting when you mentioned that point about people pointing out, hey, you're not following the aerials, you're going the wrong way. Kind of like Big Brother's watching almost. And I read a really interesting article the other day suggesting before you turn into Big Brother on your neighbors, remember that after COVID, they're going to be the ones watching your house when you're away. They're going to be making sure your children are safe in the neighborhood, and they're going to be the ones going to help you with your job when you go back to your office. So I thought that provided an interesting perspective on everything. And there's somebody on the line who's talking about, before COVID, there was a lot of discussion about mental health. Would you agree that the COVID has kind of pushed mental health to a forefront that we've never quite seen before, especially how it impacts our workplaces?
I think if you can find something good in what we have gone through so far with COVID, is I really do think it's given enough people a bit of an experience with mental health that's creating a bit more compassion for people that are struggling with it. I think people are recognizing that when they're at home and having a bad day, it's not by choice or design. We need to be more helpful and supportive to people, and I think COVID is helping with that, in the sense that it's forcing the communication. It's forcing us to talk about it in the same way that we're really having to have some very serious discussions about addiction in the same
Right.
way. Because once those failed coping strategies, people are trapped with them. And sadly, in our town, we are seeing the outcome of that.
Yeah, when you talk about mental health, Irene, you almost have to talk about addiction. They seem to go hand in hand. And we, of course, know in our communities that is another pandemic. And so how do we help our employers understand that mental health in the workplace is just as valuable as any other program that we would look at as an employer? How do you get that messaging out, maybe to decision makers?
I think the challenge is it's very hard to point out what hasn't happened. So when we work preventatively, we know with long-term study that there's absolute benefits to that, and we know there are cost savings. But when you're sitting down and looking column to column to column, some of these programs seem exceptionally expensive if looked at in isolation. And I think it is about looking at the workplace as a whole and people working together as teams, because I think if we measure things such as, sick time, conflict, if we start looking at some of these indicators that people in mental health would know are important to measure, it's easier for employers to understand the importance of and the power of those support services for not only their employees, but their families.
Right.
Because if we're not putting in programs for the families, then we have employees coming to work who are exceptionally distracted. And in our town, we have a lot of heavy industry, and we need people 100% at their job. We can't have distractions. So we
Absolutely. So
need,
our state of mental health affects our physical health, and we're talking in the realm of health and
yeah,
safety, right, Irene?
absolutely. And we need everybody to go home at the end of the shift. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's our non-negotiable. So in order
That's
to
right.
do that, we have to do what we can. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've started saying at Workplace Safety North, we want everybody to go home with a healthy body and a healthy mind, especially
Absolutely.
during COVID, right? So one of the
Yeah.
things that I've noted around mental health, the one word that we keep hearing is anxiety, anxiety, anxiety. There was a lot of discussion about it before, but now it's rare that I hear somebody talk about COVID without saying anything about anxiety. So, I mean, for our viewers, can you explain to us what anxiety is actually? What it would feel like for somebody who having anxiety, and then when we get into the solutions, we can talk a little bit about the solutions around anxiety.
Okay. There are so many definitions of it. I like to look at things as at its most basic. So anxiety is your body telling you that something is too much. And if we don't listen to our body is exceptionally good at upping what it's telling us. So that situation where, you're sitting at work, you got a little bit of a headache, ignoring that, ignoring everything that's going on around. Okay, now we're getting something else, and we keep adding to those symptoms. And sadly, when someone's struggling with anxiety, the one thing that they can describe is an inability or a perceived inability to move forward with it. It can be that restricting to what that person is trying to do. They cannot step forward. They cannot speak. The world is sort of divided into two categories: those that have felt it and those that at some point probably will feel it. But it is a big deal, and the body has a great deal of power over what it is that it is trying to help us understand.
Can you explain to us, Irene, maybe some of your clients or your own experiences? What does anxiety actually feel like? When you talk to somebody who's had an anxiety situation or a panic attack, to hear them explain it is really eye-opening. So for our viewers, can you kind of share with us what it actually feels like for that person?
I think for everybody it's different. The one that people seem to talk about the most is the absolute inability to move forward. So I'll use the example of someone walking into a very busy department store. And as they're standing there, it feels like everybody's moving around them, everybody's staring at them. They can't move. They can't speak. They can't ask for help. It feels like they are stuck in their body. For someone else, They're having so many symptoms they can't leave their house. So they're feeling physically sick, they're feeling dizzy. I think everybody will feel something a little bit different. I think the one thing that people have in common is it feels in that moment like they have lost all control. And so someone, telling them to get over it or just don't
Not very
think
helpful,
about it,
right?
not helpful at all. If we could get rid of the word relax, I think that could be helpful. I don't think we use that word very well as a society. It is overwhelming. It will stop whatever you are doing in that moment if you are stuck in your head at that point.
Right. I've heard people associate it. They thought the first time that they were physically having a heart attack.
Absolutely. And I think people have to understand that, because one of the first things we do is say to people, if you are having symptoms to that level, you need to confirm that it isn't something going on in your body.
Right.
And in speaking to doctors, they have said the same thing. They would rather exclude a heart attack and then open that door for help for that person versus someone staying at home and trying to figure it out.
So,
If you're sitting at home with chest pain, it's going to continue to escalate.
right.
Because you can only imagine if you're sitting and thinking about the amount of pain that you're in, there's no way out of that loop if there isn't help. If you can't find a way to get that assistance that you need, that ability to reach out.
So as we're talking about mental health, specifically around COVID fatigue, pandemic fatigue, what should we be looking for in our colleagues at work or our family members that would indicate to us that there is pandemic fatigue going on? What can we be looking for, Irene?
I think it's even just starting conversations with people. I think we have a horrendous habit of saying to people, hi, how are ya? But the second half of that, nobody sticks around for the answer.
Right.
So we'd be better off to just go with hi, and not
If
ask
you don't
the
really
how are
want
ya?
the answer, don't
Yeah.
ask for the second part,
I mean,
right?
yeah, picture
Okay.
if someone's really struggling and someone says, how are you? And they start to speak and the person's halfway down the hall.
Yeah,
I
I'm
think we
guilty
have
of
to,
that.
well, I think we all are. And I think we have to constructively say, if I want to be part of a team, then I'm going to check in with my teammates, whether that be family, whether that be workplace, whether that be, you're standing in line and you're watching this poor person who's working at the cash and they've just had the 7 people ahead of you yelling at them. There's nothing this person has done. There's nothing they could do better, and there's nothing they could do to make it right. People are just dropping off their frustration with whoever is standing there. And I think sometimes we can be helpers with that too, to just, have a small discussion with that person, make some eye contact, a little bit of compassion, whether
Maybe
it be in
ask
our
the
workplace.
question and then wait for the answer.
Yeah,
Maybe
I think that's a big one. And I think
it
if you,
actually is.
yeah, I think it's simple. And I think that's what we're forgetting when it comes to COVID and the complexities of it is if we do small, kind gestures, I think that can be exceptionally helpful because we've lost the ability to just walk by someone and smile.
Right.
When we have our masks on, we don't have that ability to acknowledge someone in the same way. We have to work harder. But
I
it's worth
know
doing.
it is. Absolutely. It is incredible. Most of the difficult things are worth doing, right? That's how we raise our children.
Exactly.
So at the beginning of COVID, I know a lot of employers and ourselves at Workplace Safety North, we're doing a lot of things online. And so now we're 6-7 months into it. So how do we address the mental health aspect of COVID in our workplaces when some of us have never come back together in a workplace, or that they've worked through it all, and so maybe they're feeling pandemic fatigue for a different reason.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we start tackling the mental health aspect of COVID in our workplaces, Irene?
I think it's reaching out. It's also recognizing that in more recent years, we've been socializing people to sort of look and say, well, as bad as it is, someone else has it worse. And although a great idea, not necessarily helpful when people are feeling overwhelmed. I think we have to help people recognize that it's based on their reality. So whatever is going on, if it feels overwhelming, then it is. And how can I help you?
That's
Not,
very interesting.
yeah. And I understand where the other thought comes from,
Mm-hmm.
but it's often received as dismissive.
Okay, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Never really thought of it in that way. So if we're looking to get the attention of the, I'll say, decision makers in our workplaces, what are some of the things that you might have seen that have proven successful in helping them to, we talked a little bit about it initially, about how to address the mental health aspect. Do we use COVID as our starting point right now? Because it is something very real, it's very raw, it's something that we're all living through. Is COVID a good place for those organizations that are looking for a starting journey in mental health and use COVID to have a start of a conversation?
I think it's exceptionally helpful. I think what employers have to watch for is what's sort of been the messaging and attitude about COVID thus far.
Okay.
So if it's been kind of dismissive, or we're going to muscle through it, or, if people can't do this, then maybe they're weak, then they're going to have a hard time with that as a jumping off point. And I think it's sometimes for people to be able to do similarly to what we do as parenting. If we've taken sort of a wrong turn as a parent, the best thing we can do is go back and say, look, I thought was flawed at that point. How I expressed myself was flawed. What I want us to be able to do as a team or as a workplace is, and set that up and then have behavior match that. And that allows then for some one-on-ones to check in with people. Because someone who's in the workplace and seemingly is very agitated, very angry, might have nothing to do with workplace, might have to do what they left in the morning and what they're returning to after their shift.
Right.
And so a simple one-on-one and just a checking in, because we're checking in with everyone, might be an opportunity to make sure that that person has a reminder about services that might be available for that other family member that's struggling.
So do you recommend doing check-ins with your teams to making sure that their mental health is staying as strong as it possibly can, especially during these trying times?
And I think it's acknowledging that staying strong is work, that we have to actively work on being strong as a team. So hoping that we're strong unless otherwise seen is not building a strong team.
Right.
It's acknowledging that everybody's human and saying, okay, so, everybody's struggling. What would be something that is the biggest struggle at this point? And really allowing for people to once again be vulnerable, to be able to say, you know what, it sounds crazy, it sounds small, but this is overwhelming for me.
It's interesting you say that. One of our very first guests in COVID Conversations, what really resonated with me is she said, it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
Like, be extra kind to yourself, right? I think, and that kind of resonates with most people. It's okay not to feel okay. 266 people registered for this, so we're not alone. And I think that's really important for people to understand around mental health. Would you agree?
And it's what's okay. Yeah. Like, how do we determine what's okay? Feeling overwhelmed in the moment, that's okay. It's not pleasant. Mm-hmm. But it's okay, right? And there's people that can even just sitting with a coworker and just sort of doing what we call buddy breathing. So, breathing a little slower and a little bigger will follow. If you're sitting next to someone anxious, if you're not aware of it, you are going to start breathing at their rate if you don't try and set the tone.
That's perfect. You're just flowing into our solutions part of the conversation. So thanks for that perfect segue. So can you kind of demonstrate what that looks like? If you've not been in a situation where somebody's been anxious and what you just explained, that we'll start breathing like they are. So can you give us a bit of a demonstration about what that actually could look like?
Well, and you know what, even simpler than that, what I find exceptionally helpful is don't try and figure out how to do any kind of fancy tool in a time of stress. I like the idea of you are smelling flowers and blowing out candles, because everybody's done both. So there you are, drawing in as if you're smelling pleasant flowers.
Yes, okay.
And then you were blowing out birthday candles. Maybe
okay,
not.
Well, at my age, it's going to be a little bit more than just a gentle breath.
That's why I was going to say, we'll kind of go for a midpoint, right?
How about a 4-year-old's birthday cake, blowing those candles out?
We might need more. Why don't we go for, maybe into the 30s, 40s.
Okay. So
just not overthinking.
Okay, so do it again. So then, and I encourage our viewers to actually try it while Irene walks us through it.
So once again, even if you go through the visualization, because that's helpful, close your eyes as if you are smelling, and think about whatever your favorite flower is. So you're drawing in for a moment, holding it there because this is a pleasant experience. And then it's like, okay, now I'm just blowing out candles, right? We're not counting unless that's helpful. For some people, counting is exceptionally helpful. For
Right.
other people, they're holding their breath while they're trying to do the count. So it's not working for us, right? It's
So
about
flowers and birthday cake.
flowers and birthday cake. And
Okay,
you
I
can
think I
do
can
that.
remember that.
Well, and you can do it with a 3-year-old. You can do
Right.
it with a 103-year-old, right? Like it's something that people have had in some way, some idea of what that is. And there's rather a pleasant memory attached to it too. So we're asking people to step to the side of what's going on
Right.
and
And
just be with us for a moment.
I didn't want to lose the part when you said that somebody who's anxious, their breathing is going to be very different than ours.
Absolutely.
So is that one of the ways that we can recognize that somebody is extremely anxious?
Absolutely. And I think it's just one of those things that, you know what, if you're breathing very fast and you're not bringing in what your body needs, you're going to feel faint. You know, there are a number of things that are going to happen just from our breathing. Something as simple as with the masks. When we put masks on, for some reason, for the vast majority of people, it triggers an amount of stress. It's a question of how much, but it changes how we breathe. If people think about putting that mask on, very often we switch to mouth breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Mouth breathing is not in our most relaxed state. It's often when we're anxious, when we can't get enough air, we start, sort of gulping air. And it's to say, okay, I'm putting my mask on. That means my gift to me taking care of me, in addition to not loving the mask, I'm going to treat myself well. So I am going to consciously draw in through my nose, breathe out through my mouth, because my brain associates that with calmer.
Yeah.
If I start to panic, then every time I put the mask on, I'm going to start to panic.
Irene, what do you say to those of us who try to, take up advanced yoga or mindfulness during COVID? What do you say to us?
You know what? I say be kind. I think people have to be kind to themselves. And I think the problem is it's hard to learn something new. And when you're trying to learn something new that's in your own head, that's even worse. Because
Right.
we're not kind to ourselves in our own thoughts. And so if you're trying to do something and failing miserably, which is part of learning, if it starts turning into agitation and anger and frustration, then we have to back up from that and say, maybe now is not the time. This might be the time to say, I'm going to want to learn that later, but right now, I'm going to do progressive relaxation. I'm going to go online and I'm going to find a whole bunch of free podcasts, and every day I'm going to try one or two. And if the moment that voice starts, I'm like, heck no, sounds like my teacher from grade 2. Don't even listen to any more of it. Delete. Go on to the next one.
Walk away.
Just walk away from it. We are trying to find something helpful. We're not trying to build a list of things that didn't work.
Okay, great advice. Thank you. And I see our friend Gabby, so that means we have a question from the audience. Hi, Gabby.
Hi, thanks, Angel. Yes, we have a question here in the chat box. Someone is asking, what if an employer cannot provide assistance to an employee who has expressed a need? So the employer is unable to provide reduced work hours for parents, for example, or to assist aging parents, and they can't reduce workplace expectations that would allow for more work-life balance. What are other things that they can do that aren't, these kind of tangible go-tos?
Right. I think even just hearing what people have to say, I think sometimes even just listening and say, oh, I get that that's hard. And it might be the ability to say to someone, you know what, why don't you take 15 minutes and just collect your thoughts, knowing that yes, and especially in some of the smaller businesses, these services and trying to assist people in those ways are really expensive. But it's also to put out there a list of what's available. So what else is helpful? So when you can say to someone, I don't have something directly, but I have this brochure, I have this pamphlet, I have this free service that you can reach out to. The government does have some online services to help, and they are putting them out there specifically because of the stress of COVID. So very important. And I think it also helps the employer, because it's really rough to look at someone who's struggling and then go, I don't know what to do. I don't have anything to give them. So we just get a little creative.
And I believe one of the solutions that's come through the government, if I'm not mistaken, there is some financial help if you do have to go off of work for COVID related things. And I don't know if that extends to parents, but I am watching somebody who's in that situation with an aged parent, and it's just very complicated. You talked about going to the grocery store, going to the doctor and the hospital is even more complicated now. And it needs a whole team around the people. I know that a lot of employers right now are struggling with that very question. How do we support people during this COVID who need additional help with family members, but also keep our business viable? And I think the ones that are doing it successfully are, like you said, Irene, they're having the conversations amongst each other. They're looking for some community resources, and they're banding together as much as they can. There are some organizations, though, that they just can't do it, and that's just a fact of life. At Workplace Safety North, we're very, very fortunate that we're able to work around people's schedules, and it extends us to parents who've chosen not to put their children back in school. That's been a huge consideration for people that are at home. So, and I see somebody is saying, I find those who can cope with change like this better than others, and be quite judgmental towards those who for whatever reason cannot, which is also not helpful. Could that person put a little bit more, because I think that would be an interesting part of the conversation if you just add a little bit of breadth or depth to the comment, and I'll look again on the page. But Irene, if somebody said to you, if you had a magic wand and there was a way you could develop one wellness strategy to use to mitigate the mental health challenges directly attributed to COVID, what would you recommend?
I think I still go back to, and I love a magic wand. I think it goes back to kindness to self and kindness to others. We need to be doing that, 10 minutes before we ever heard of this horrible virus. But it becomes even more important, because if we're beating ourselves up, then adapting to anything is impossible. Supporting other people is impossible. I can't be helpful to someone if I'm busy tracking all the things I've done wrong and now creating a list of all the people that have wronged me. So kindness to self, kindness to others, I think really does become exceptionally helpful. And when we look at people that are resilient, we have to be careful, because sometimes the people that we hold up and say, well, look at so-and-so, they're coping so exceptionally well. I can say with 100% certainty they're not. They are giving the impression of. We have created for people a desire that people look like everything is fine. Right. And we have created people that have been taught that that is the only acceptable answer. So we can't make that assumption that some people are doing better than others. We have to assume that everybody's struggling, whether it be even just the slightest thing. I mean, look at how agitated people get when they're driving. Well, people are more agitated now, and we have more distracted drivers. Is it COVID related? Well, probably, but could I draw a line scientifically? No.
You touched on resilience, and there are lots of things we can do to build our resilience. And
absolutely,
one of the ones that works the best for me is practicing an attitude of gratitude. When I start feeling a pandemic fatigue coming over me, which happens quite regularly, I find if I reach out and am kind and thankful to somebody else, it's quite helpful. Can you explain how that kind of psyche works when we're actually thanking somebody else, what it does for us? Because it's quite interesting.
Well, and our brain does what we ask it to do. And that's a challenge, because we don't often ask it to do. So it does what it does. And for whatever reason, our brain seems to skew negative. So when we decide, okay, I'm going to start tracking things that I should be grateful for, that shifts us over from tracking who has wronged us, or who, what is not fair, or who's getting more, or I have to do more. Right. Or when we start tracking that drags you down.
Right. Thanks. Oh, and there's Gabby. Hello, Gabby.
Hi, thanks. Just another question in the chat box. So someone is asking if you have any suggestions if a coworker dwells on the pandemic. So they're talking about numbers, closures, the US, Canada, Ontario, dentist, gym, and and they're very overwhelmed by it. She says, or they say, I'm compassionate and kind in my conversations, but I'm not sure it's healthy for her or myself to be entirely focused on it.
And I think that's exactly where you start. I think that's the perfect stepping off point, is to say, because all you can do is really speak to what I am doing. So to be able to look at that person and say, you know, that certainly is a lot of information, but my gift to me is I am taking parts of the day where I'm not dealing with that. I'm not tracking that. I know I can go to the internet. I know if I need it, I will look it up. But right now I am creating these gaps where it's COVID-free to the best of my ability, and really gently helping that person understand that if they're coming to talk to you, it has to be about the individuals. You know, in the same way that when things are really stressful at work, people start to gossip more. And people think that's a gender thing. That is across both genders, absolute. It's important to know that we have to talk about what we choose to talk about. And if we choose to talk about other people, we're not having a good conversation. So the rule is, I'm talking about things that I find to be positive. You know, I'm not talking about COVID 24 hours a day. I'm not talking about so-and-so, because my rule is I only talk about people that are in this discussion. And that really does help clean things up for people. It's exhausting when you have someone who's continuously giving you updates.
It is, and I agree with your whole, let's have a period of time where we're not talking about COVID. I mean, when you were speaking about that, Irene, what I was picturing in my mind was pre-COVID, when we would talk about mental health in the workplace and we would talk about energy vampires. Well, now they're COVID energy vampires.
Absolutely.
And it can be extremely stressful. Just before we went live, we were talking about, you know, rather than looking at social media and all the news around COVID, go outside and take a look at the spectacular fall colors.
Yeah.
Get your half an hour outside and your deep breathing in. Hi, Gabby, again.
Hi. So we have another question here, and it might be moving into the next topic, so I hope that's okay, the next theme.
Sure. Yeah.
But the person asks, as we learn more about COVID-19 and our workplace changes and adds new protocols to try and protect our employees and our business, a lot of our employees are feeling that they're getting punished for something they didn't do. They feel that since we have not been so affected, that what we are currently doing is fine, and only if there are more cases, then additional protocols should be added. Any suggestions on how to help our employees come on board with these new protocols?
I think it's important for people to understand that it's ever changing. Like, we woke up this morning to 3 new confirmed cases in our community. So we don't know what the numbers are going to look like. And I think if people understand that it becomes more of a we as a team. In the same way we do as parents, we as a family, it's like, okay, as a team, in our effort to stay healthy, the research is showing. And so really pitching it as, this is part of an active design. We are working on this. And if people disagree with what we're doing, let's have a discussion about it. Let's not allow this to split into them and us. Let's have a discussion. We've never been in a situation where information, you know, I mean, we walked into this with nothing. We knew nothing about this virus. We are getting better. We are understanding more, but that's changing things. And I think we do have to really embrace the team. So the advice we've received is, therefore, we as a workplace are going to, and then really understanding there's going to be pushback. And that isn't necessarily people being only angry. That's people who are frustrated, who don't understand, and might not be feeling heard. So we have to set up that environment that allows them to maybe vent a little bit about, you know, we didn't have to do this. Why are we doing this? This is a virus that we don't know about till it pops up. When it pops up, we're now stuck for 2 weeks trying to figure out, where has it been, you know, prior. There's a lag time with this. So yeah, it does feel way more abstract than people are used to.
Yeah, I know in speaking with employers, that has come up numerous times.
All the time.
Especially in areas that have had very few cases. So it's a way to how to keep people motivated to still wear the mask, still do the social distancing. So I think, you know, your suggestion is we're doing the best that we can. And as a company that really, really wants to keep you safe, we're doing the best that we can. And sometimes you may think it's over the top, but our intent is to keep you safe.
That's right.
And I think, if you keep going back to the kindness, we're not doing this because we like to watch you struggle, wear a mask, because we don't want you to be within, close quarters with your colleagues. And I think you were dead on. We have to respect everybody's opinion and just try to listen and be kind. And I think if we could have that magic pill that could answer that question, which is an amazing question, I think we'd be on a bigger news feed than we are now, right, Irene?
Yeah.
It's a question a lot of organizations are struggling with. And some of the advice that's been given to me by some of them being successful is just saying they just keep on with the constant messaging. It's consistent, and they just open their doors to listen to everybody, right?
Well, and I think it's to recognize we're not only trying to protect our fellow colleagues, our employees, we're trying to protect their families as well. There's ripples to this. If we do this well in the workplace, then we're also protecting those that each of our workers love. So we're really building in. Yes, it's a pain in the butt. There is no doubt. But does it feel like something that we're all trying together? Because that goes back to that same idea.
There was somebody who asked the question, how do you get management to understand? Right now, a lot of places went back to work. They were working at home and then they went back. So how do we get management to understand that there can be a lot of stress for different people as we return to the offices? So how do we get that messaging across, Irene?
Well, I think it's something that they have to understand or they get in the way of it. Like if they don't understand it, they make their own job harder. So if they can't get that having been at home and wiping down your groceries and not visiting anyone and being isolated isn't going to create a challenge when you go to walk back into your workplace, then we need to have some discussions. Because being at home, although people often think, well, how awesome is that? My experience in working with people is it's not awesome. It's not awesome. People are isolated. They're alone with their thoughts. There is not a worse combo out there for us. It's one thing to be on holidays. It's another thing to be at home because we're talking about a virus. It's a very different thing. It's kind of like someone who ends up with a physical injury. They go skiing, they break their leg, and then everyone's like, hey, you get to be off for like 2 months now. That is not off.
Right. Somebody here is talking about COVID has been particularly difficult for youth and teens. And you and I were just talking about that earlier. And he's wondering, are there any resources or supports that employers can share with these staff to acknowledge and to support their after work challenges, which is really interesting because you noted very early in the conversation that anything's happening in our home, we're bringing to our workplace. So
Absolutely.
What kind of advice can you give to our parents who are our coworkers that have, the care of youth and teens?
I think it's to sit down with teens and do one of those once again. We were wrong. We were wrong and the stats are changing. We thought, and we panicked because a lot of vulnerable people, a lot of older people got sick. And we, the adults, looked at that and went, well, it's far more of an issue for that age grouping. We are now looking at the statistics and it's changing. And it's changing substantially. And I think as a parent, it's that ability to sit down and say, okay, we have to have a talk. We have to have a talk about what we as a family have as a rule. So if we as a family make it a rule, then it's a commitment to each of the family members. And I think with teens, it's such an exceptional age, but they don't have logic yet. And they literally don't have logic. They have the ability to give the impression that they understand what we're saying. But the research says not so much. We have taught them how to answer our questions just to make us stop talking. So they'll go, yep, I understand. When really, they'll sit in my office and say, I don't know what the heck they were talking about, but they droned for 20 minutes, right? We have to sit down and have a discussion. And we have to say that sometimes as parents, we get frightened. And it's easier if we know that everybody in the family is following the same rule. So I, as a parent, also can't go out and break those rules and say, yeah, but I'm an adult. It's we as a family.
Right. Somebody is saying, what would be the best first step for somebody who's struggling with anxiety and stress during the pandemic that are currently working during the COVID situation and have a young family at home? So how do we help them mitigate that stress, Irene?
I think there's a few really good first steps. I think they have to look at, do they have a partner? Would it be fair to say, I'm struggling? Would that feel safe? Because I think anxiety often looks an awful lot like anger. So
Okay.
what we need is exactly what we're pushing away. So I think as first steps, it's to draw in people that are the closest and safest for them. And then it's to say, okay, do I need to talk to someone? And it's to start looking at resources. There are some online resources that the government has been updating and really promoting that allow someone, while still in their home, to have some of those initial appointments
Right.
and have some initial discussions and recognize that it's not a sign of weakness. You know, for someone to be struggling, I think it's a sign of strength that they can say, okay, wait a minute, what I'm feeling, this isn't right. I need some help. That is the sign of strength.
Right. And I think,
Yeah.
can you repeat that one more time? Because I think that's a really important message.
Well, I think it's just really to look at. It's a sign of strength to be able to say, you know, this is not okay. I'm not feeling okay. I need to talk to someone. I need some support. I need some help. We often look at partners and say, well, you know, you're not helping me. You're not doing enough. Well, if you don't tell people what feels helpful, they don't know. And
Right.
we were all raised in different families. So in each of our family, we have our own coping strategy. And most couples don't sit down and say, what is going to be our coping strategy? How are we going to support each other?
Mhm.
You know, teach your partner what you need.
Well, I keep going back to what you say, and it's like when we were small children, either going off to kindergarten or to the playground for the very first time, that important person who was molding us into a human being, you know, taught us, be kind, don't bully, listen to others. I mean, those are all lessons we learned as young children, and through our conversation today, you've kind of touched on them. So really, it's going back to lessons we learned probably as children and really reaching deep.
Or we
And
hoped we learned as
we
children.
hoped, yes, okay, if that's yeah, that's true. And our moments maybe when we're feeling the most stressed ourselves to really reach deep and be kind to others, because as you said, those are the opportunities where even myself, and I'll include that, I feel like I'm at a boiling point and I find it very difficult to be kind to others. And I
Sure.
think, you know, at this point, if we can't be kind to ourselves first, then we're not going to be kind to others, right?
It is the only way we're going to get through this. Like
Yeah.
if we can't create kindness within ourselves, then we can't have the capacity to be kind to others because we just get frustrated. And when
And
we get frustrated, it's not helpful.
right. And you were talking about at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody rallying together,
Oh,
and we would see these concerts in Italy of these cellists on their
yeah.
balconies, and that just kind of faded away. So maybe it's time to reach back and do some of the things that make people feel supportive and that they're part of a team, and it's not just you who's being asked to wear the mask or do the social distancing. So would that be helpful to workplaces, Irene, and to individuals?
Yeah, and I think it's to recognize that. It's to say, okay, so what am I going to do today? Because I could spend my day pointing out what everyone's doing wrong. You
Yeah.
know, I could stand at the grocery store and say, you're going the wrong way. You're going the wrong way. Look at the arrow. You're going the wrong way. Or I could say, you know what? You know, people are going to go the wrong way because when we're in a crisis, we are not using the best part of our brain. We are reacting to everything that's going on. We are not taking in new information. So to create shame and humiliation for someone is not going to teach them which way the arrows are going on the floor. You're not doing something for the greater good when you're doing that.
Well said. So we're getting very close to this to say goodbye, which it's just incredible to me. These hours just fly by. You know, I mean, it's been a real pleasure and a really positive learning experience for me. If nothing else, I hope each and every one of us who've been on this conversation is going to be a little more kind to ourselves and then translate that to other people. So Irene, I really want to thank you. I know you're extremely busy at this time. And for those of us who joined in Workplace Safety North COVID conversations, I think they extend their thanks to you also. So just as Gabby had noted, there'll be the recording and resources will be sent to you shortly, and they'll be at the WSN website. Next month, we're going to be having a conversation about the air we breathe during COVID and how important that is. So Irene, every time we end one of these conversations, we give you the floor. And this is your Irene's final words of wisdom, what you want us to take home, or some story that you'd like to share with us. But the stage is yours. And with that, I say goodbye to our viewers, and please listen to Irene's last words of wisdom. And thanks again, Irene.
So a thought and a story. So the thought is, one of the best things I've heard as a tool to getting through this is the concept of FFT. Now, F can be friggin', or, a much better, more solid word, first time. So everything that we do during this pandemic is for the first time. So when we have that moment of frustration, recognize it for what it is. So this is the friggin' first time. So whether you're going to the grocery store and they've changed the rules again, whether at work you get there and the door has a new sign that says you got to do this, you got to do that, it's an FFT moment. I think friggin's an okay word. I know which word I use, but I leave it to each person with that. The second is a story, and it shows the difference between what parents are thinking and what children are thinking. Often, my colleague and my sibling and I will have moments where we tell our mother the actual story versus the story that she thought happened when we were teenagers and such. Rather a frightening moment, and we generally involve alcohol for the poor woman. But one of the stories was, I was talking about how she had influenced reading time with children for my children. And I had this memory of us sitting in this room, and it was dark, and there was a candle, and there was a flashlight, and she was reading this story, and it was the best moment ever. I don't know what the book was, but I have so many memories of all those decades ago, sitting snuggled in her arms with this book. And as I'm telling this story, her face, it's a bigger and bigger reaction. And she's like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm telling this story, and she looks and says, "That was the day the tornado hit." She had us in her lap in the dark and was just trying to keep it together. She's like, "I was not calm. I don't know what book it was." And I thought, well, there's where it is. Sometimes in parenting, it's fake it till you make it. Right? It's about being present for that moment and doing the best you can. And that left two very different impressions of how that went, but it worked. There was no right or wrong way to do it, but there was this very different experience. And so I think we have to cut ourselves some slack and do the best that we can, whether it be at home, at the grocery store, at our workplace. Cut ourselves some slack and cut other people some slack. And then we just keep moving forward. And thank you very much for your time and patience.
Thank you, Irene. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.